This card doesn't seem to be about murder, but the art does. We see daggers and circles of blood around Bhaal. Bhaal, Lord of Murder, can actually conjure up these bone daggers, and the drops around his head are the same as the ones from his sigil. That and more details later, but how do you become a murder god? Sometimes it happened by murdering, but with Bhaal, the job was just given to him. Well, not just. Centuries ago, Bhaal, Myrkul, and Bane went on adventures together. Eventually, this led them to kill two divine beings. The trio existing of a max-level assassin, a necromancer, and a fighter were already way too strong. But the divine essence gave them the power to be omnipotent. At this point, they could defeat armies without taking damage. Still, they gathered thousands to fight the god of strife, death, and the dead. They got to the god and took his powers, which he gave freely. Probably because he was the god of strife, and being the all-powerful god of the dead, who knew that all would come to him eventually, meant that strife didn't exist to him anymore, which bored him in turn. So, he gave the gods the powers. Bane took the power of strife, going to rule the living. Myrkul, who we already covered, took control of the already dead. And then Bhaal, with one choice left, took murder. As he was the assassin, murder was fitting. Bhaal just got the moment of death itself and murder. The aspect is not evil, it's rather neutral. But before we return to his card, let's look at his powers first. When he became a god, he quickly gained all the powers needed to become an omnipotent murderer. He gained the ability to move at 10,000 kilometers per hour, but he could also teleport, which I guess is faster. He could be resurrected, as long as he had followers, because his powers come from people murdering, especially when it's in his name. He's a massive tank in this form, able to regenerate, but also immune to acid, cold, disease, mind tricks, electricity, and very resistant to fire and all kinds of magic. He's strong enough to lift whales, but smart enough to use telepathy, necromancy, and he speaks all languages. He and his avatars can shape and size shift, inflict curses and manipulate minds. And he can divine to the point of, spoilers, predicting his own death. His coolest ability, because it's unique, is to manifest bone daggers wherever and have them float around him, making him a great ranged unit too. This is overpowered, but it only works in his own realm. Bhaal can, like most gods, send avatars with a slight part of these powers to Earth. He can turn beings bloodthirsty, or make them feel terrorized with these avatars. He can drain life from a distance and paralyze on touch. And he creates great places, great evil places, that suck the power out of the world and corrupt and kill beings around those dark wells, is what they're called. Out of these, he also summons friends, ranging from owlbears that defeat whole packs of wolves, to the first displacer beast that could best a leviathan. His followers gain an even smaller section of his powers, which is still terrifying. These Bhaalin, let's call them, had to murder once every 10 days at least. Having way more followers than Myrkul, Bhaal had the opportunity to gain more power, but he always used them immediately to incite more anger among the people. Of course, this would strengthen the god even more in turn, just like subscribing strengthens this channel. The Bhaalin knew that every murder strengthened their god and said before every murder, Bhaal awaits you, embraces you, and none may escape him. Bhaal, in return, granted them strength and speed along with the power to fade into shadows and paralyze sneak attack victims. With all the sneaking, free murder is still the main principle of the Bhaalites. We see this in Bhaal's invoker, who sheds a literal new light on the followers of Bhaal. This is a draconic shaman that uses the fire magic that Bhaal also grants his followers. Murdering of any kind, even and maybe especially the fleshy kind, counts towards Bhaal's domain. It's even a rule for his assassins that to gain rank they have to murder in many different manners. The flavor of this card says, "The Lord of Murder has freed me from the shackles of mortal laws and gifted me with fire to carry out his will." Again proving that fire magic is a skill of the Bhaalites, and any skill you could imagine that could help with murder falls under Bhaal's domain. The skill on the card Scorching Ray is the spell that casts 3 rays, just like we see in the art. That's a little bit of a sidestep. If you had killed 16 different sentient life forms in 16 different ways, you could become a Deathstalker. You would gain the power to incite anger in others. I am not sure whether killing 16 different forms of farm animals counts, but you'd also need the skill with small weapons and destruction magic, plus finding 16 different ways to kill anything is kind of creative at least. You'd also need to be lawfully evil, but you gain semi-immortality with the ability The Last Breath of Bhaal, which means that you are resurrected after an hour of laying dead, as if you meet Bhaal and he will keep you in his domain for a little bit before returning you to the place and hoping it will be a little bit safer for you, which is kind of cute. Here we see 4 very loyal subjects of Bhaal, although I am not sure whether the 2 wraiths in the back are alive or statues. This artifact has 2 parts. The first one is an adventure, meaning that you go and do something. In this case you don't go far, a picnic, but you perform a bone offering, which is slightly different. Apparently your god reacted by resurrecting it into this whole skeleton. A new assassin it seems, and it might be that it has been in Bhaal's service before it died. Maybe the 2 priests even sacrificed a friend here, so that it could be returned as an ever loyal servant. The second part is an artifact, the Altar of Bhaal. This lets you sacrifice one of your creatures for good to get another servant back. You could also get Bhaal himself back, which might be flavorful. In the art you see the true priests coming before the altar. And note the sign of Bhaal on the ground in gold, the skull with the same blood circle Bhaal had. Let's get the easy design choices out of the way from Bhaal, starting with the art. The knives you see floating around him are the ones he conjured. You can let them float and circle around himself as protection, but he prefers to make someone run with them so that he can get them himself. That's why he's holding one as well. Then, a bit more niche, you can see a sort of crown of green goo behind him. That might be his shape-shifting. More clear in the art are the drops of blood circling his empty-eyed face. These are what inspired the sigil of Bhaal. We see him sneaking behind the throne, and this is very significant too. The throne is part of the domain of his old partner Bane. While Bhaal knows not to get into the open yet, as he's now a lesser god compared to Bane, as he's been killed a few times, and Bane has as well, but has gotten his powers back sooner. Bhaal has to sneak around behind Bane's back and garner power that way. Bane had been killed around the same era, but he put his powers in the hands of another god, who would keep his followers ready for Bane's return. Bane now has about the same power as he had before, even as a fellow Damite deity. Bane has gathered more powers by conquering other pantheons, but he's still mortal as ever. Then to the card. Bhaal is a 4/4, seems small for a god, but he prefers to sneak around, and being in the mortal world, he's way weaker than it used to be as a true god. His colors are black for his caring more about himself and his aspect of death, red for the murder and setting himself and his followers free from society, and then green, which is about strength, that he grants his followers, and the fact that death is part of nature. The weird thing is how his goading works. Goading a creature is logical. Bhaal has the power to incite anger into others, so goading is normal. And giving his followers strength is what comes with them murdering enough people, so the +1 counter is normal too. But why does a creature on your side have to die? Well, that's exactly Bhaal's most important story. Ages ago, Bhaal was angry at a few islands that used to be peaceful. Because they had killed his agent, note that this is not really his avatar, this agent was Khaz'goroth, a T-Rex that could turn humans into bloodthirsty wolves and that turned barbarians into bloodthirsty ever-loyal undead blood warriors, who could only live by killing every 10 days. Just like with Bhaal's followers, true. When Khaz'goroth was almost killed, his heart was stored and Bhaal would use his own avatar to come down to the islands. He would succeed in corrupting the isles and eventually killed their goddess by starving her of peaceful forests. Now during this, Bhaal used his powers of divination to foresee his own death, because 700 years after his arrival, he would be killed. But in that time he would create a massive amount of children that he would grant a small piece of his powers. These would become the Bhaalspawn. They would grow their own power by killing and would keep a connection with Bhaal even after he was killed by Cyric, who then took his name and aspects and became Murder God for a while. Eventually, the Bhaalspawn would start to kill each other. Some of them noticed that killing other Bhaalspawn would increase their power significantly. This is because all the essence and power would be put into the winning spawn every time. As was the case with the Bhaalspawn Abdel Adrian, a human Bhaalspawn who was at heart a good leader more than anything. He used his fire magic gained from the murder god to defeat evil over and over, until he was the one to kill the last of his siblings, turning him into a slayer aspect of Bhaal and letting him return to demi-godhood, Bhaal that is. But before that, Abdel had already garnered a lot of divine essence and had rejected it, sealing it away in a mountain in hell. Meaning that once the slayer aspect of Bhaal was killed, he could return as the god of murder again. How much his power has grown since then is unclear. Going back to the card, we do see why a creature dying allows Bhaal to enact his powers again. He can use the death of his spawn to incite anger in a new creature that makes them stronger, even now that he is alive again. There is one last aspect to this card, believe it or not. This is the mechanic that all three gods share. The ability to ascend with indestructibility as long as you halve your life total, or the starting one. I believe this is because the three gods benefit from the downfall of society, and once it's crumbling, they might return as true lesser gods. And while that may happen again, remember that you can do the same to this channel, in a lesser form perhaps. You can turn slowly into a deity with just one click of your time. Thank you for the 6% that already did so at this point.